Welcome to the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else on the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and man, do we appreciate that. Hope we're helping you fill your sports void that's been created by the lack of any competition anywhere. Holy smokes, this is tough, right? Well, we hope that we're helping you get through those tough times with conversations about great teams and great programs, unbelievable seasons with our season recap series. And one of the seasons that we need to reflect back upon is the season that the Iowa Hawkeyes had. So we brought in Mike Hlas from the Cedar Rapid Gazette. Please give Mike a follow at capital Hlas. He has one of the finest Twitter handles going. And you can follow all of his work over at thegazette.com, or you can just dial up Cedar Rapid Gazette online. That'll catch you up on everything Iowa Hawkeyes hoops. Mike and I were lucky enough to talk about Luka Garza in his basketball DNA and his old school moves. Talked about the shoes. It's got to be the shoes, right? Jordan Bohannon's mood, and we even dipped into a little Monte Morris and George Niang. Such a pleasant conversation. Is there enough defense on this team to make a big move, a big push for a title and for some movement in March? Talked about Coach Fran, and maybe he needs some guardrails on his sideline antics. And then we also just talked about, hey, what's one of the snake pits that might exist inside the Big Ten? And is this team for real? Mike gives a recipe of what is needed next season for the Hawkeyes to replicate or even go beyond what they accomplished this particular season. And Mike was nice enough to even reflect upon an awesome Grammy moment towards the end of the podcast, so you want to hang around for that. If you really like what you're listening to, please give the podcast a follow on Twitter at SDS Podcast. Efficiency of keystrokes, of course. Go over and give Mike a follow over on his end at Randall Rant. He is insightful, educational, and entertaining, and is always talking sports. And if you really like what you're listening to, dial up your podcast consumption vehicle of choice, hit the review, and say nice things about our guests, just like Mike Hlas from the Cedar Rapid Gazette. Again, give Mike a follow over at capital Hlas. Let's get into that conversation about the Iowa Hawkeyes. Cheers. Enjoy. All right, listeners, welcome back into the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're trying to give you your sports fix and talk about the programs that made moves this season and might make further moves next season. One of those teams is the Iowa Hawkeyes. So we brought in Mike Hlas from the Cedar Rapid Gazette to talk some Hawkeye basketball. Mike, how are things going out there?
Well, it's a little slow, like every place else in the world. The off season is not as interesting as it normally would be. I mean, I guess it is in some regards, but really it's not. So we're just all in the same place, pins and needles, waiting.
It is a little bit of a waiting game, and that waiting game is going slow. So I think your words to describe it are pretty accurate. I guess we want to ask right away, how are you holding up out there? How are things out on your end of the woods in your neck of the country?
Trying to not let it get to me. Take all the scientists seriously, and I don't take anybody else too seriously. It's disheartening for me to see how that a lot of people just can't seem to play along, but ain't that America, you know? Little pink houses.
A little bit. It must have been pretty fun to cover this Iowa team this season. You had a first-team All-American, Luka Garza. You had student athletes leaving shoes on the court. You had red shirts involved. You got Coach Fran. This team kept you pretty busy this season, huh, Mike?
Yeah, it was a good season, and from a sports writer's point of view, I was very disappointed that the plug had to be pulled. Some years you're just like, this is a mundane story. Let's just get it over with, you know. I was looking forward to the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament because I thought that on a neutral court, Iowa would be a very tough out against anybody. We'll never know. I know that they thought they were going to be. I mean, they were going to start the Big Ten tournament on Thursday, where you got to win 4 games in 4 days, which is seldom done in conference tournaments. And they were pretty confident that they were going to get to Sunday, which I wouldn't have been as confident, but they thought that, you know, they played everybody in the league and that on a neutral court that there wasn't anybody that they couldn't beat. You know, before you do it, you have to believe it. So I certainly don't think there would have been anybody that would have beaten them soundly in either tournament. They weren't a great team, but they were a team that kept coming at you and you were going to have to beat yourselves rather than wait for them to beat themselves.
Especially on the offensive end. And it's not impossible to win those 4 games in 4 days, as we've seen UConn do that in the Big East tournament over here on the East Coast. But, I mean, let's start with where all of that, the pivot point for your offense. And let's start with the first-team All-America, Luka Garza. You had student athlete. He stretches the floor. He's a load in the post. He has one of the highest usage percentages in the Big Ten with 33.4. And he was just a beast. Mike, what improvements, large or small, allowed Garza to flourish in such a way inside the Big Ten where he averaged almost 26 points a game in conference?
A fistful of moves. He's a summertime workaholic, and he's got a father who played major college basketball. He's got basketball DNA just coming in from every part of his family tree. His mother played ball in what was then Yugoslavia, and he's got a grandfather who coached the game, and he's got an uncle who played professionally and cousins, and this is what he was born for almost. And then he grows to 6'11", only adding to that, but he's just an absolute student of the game. And old school stuff, Jack Sikma, Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, just moves. And so he doesn't waste time in the summer, and he comes back in the fall with more to his game. Now this year, his dad's is a pretty good promoter. I mean, he's a really good promoter, but he's been posting a lot of videos online from back out in Washington when he's having Luka working on all sorts of things, but a hook shot is his new thing. He wants him to have a hook shot and you don't see players shooting hook shots in college basketball or any level of basketball. But if you got somebody who's 6'11" and who can do it well, you can't stop it. And so that's the next thing they want to add. Plus, he's constantly working on his three-point shot, which was decent this year. Not great, but effective in the aspect that you had to come out and guard him. You give him an open three, he's going to make it most of the time. And so I remember covering a game in Philadelphia. Iowa played Penn State there. It was one of the best. It may have been the best game I saw in person all season. And Garza's getting his points left and right, in the blocks. But then at some point in the second half, he steps back and hits a three, and in the Palestra, you're in the crowd if you're the media, basically. There's no separation. It's a bandbox. And it was funny for me to hear Penn State people happy that he was taking the three-point shot, and then when he made it, they're like, "You gotta be kidding me!"
Like, what could we possibly do to defend this guy? I mean, he made over a three a game. I think he had almost 40 makes over the season. So the fact that he has this unguardable aspect, okay, yeah, you framed it perfectly right there. The fan base was pleased that he stepped out and took a three, and then when he nails it, all they can do is throw up their hands. That's what it seemed like the season was for him, like offensively.
It was fun to watch him play on the road because the harassment he would get, and there was never really any harassment's not a good word, just typical stuff you get from road fans to try and throw you off a little
razzing, right? A little razz.
Well, it's like, okay, in the beginning of games, they're on him, and you could just sense that towards the 30, 35, 38-minute mark, there's a little more respect from those people as the game goes along, like, yeah, okay, he came here with a lot of hype, but he backed it up.
No doubt. He backed it up big time. I mean, you could argue that he was player of the year of the nation over Obi Toppin. That was a debate that went on, pretty much as soon as play stopped. And, he usually finished first or second in those arguments either way. And if he comes back, he has to be the obviously leading vote getter and kind of leader in the clubhouse as far as that goes for next season. Since we've been watching a little bit of The Last Dance, getting our, basketball hoops fix, it's got to be the shoes, right? Mike, you got to tell us a little bit about Jordan Bohannon's boss move of leaving his shoes on the three-point line after the massive showdown with Iowa State. Bohannon possibly overpower Hilton Magic with this move? Is he a magician?
Well, the thing is that most of the crowd was gone and out the doors before he did it because the game was well in hand. But yeah, it was, I talked about Luka Garza's dad, Frank, and promotion. Jordan Bohannon's pretty good at self-promotion himself.
Sure is.
And to me, that's what this was. This stemmed back to a game in Iowa City a couple of years earlier. Monte Morris, who's now a 3-year vet with the Denver Nuggets, terrific point guard from Iowa State. had let it be known that he was going to leave his shoes at half court in Iowa's Carver Hawkeye Arena if the Cyclones won at Iowa that night. But they didn't win at Iowa that night, so he didn't do it. But Bohannon and other Iowa players got wind of it. Well, Bohannon, the night before, gets on a little taunting session with George Niang, played at Iowa State. Yeah, and he's now with the Utah Jazz. And Niang's a staunch Iowa State guy. And so they're going back and forth, and Niang's giving him a hard time because when Niang was with the Cyclones own the Hawkeyes. And it's riling up Bohannon, and he decides at some point the night before the game or the day of the game that if Iowa wins, he's going to leave his shoes on the court. And Iowa won big. Iowa State did not have a good team at all this season. The Hawkeyes had lost 8 in a row at Ames, and it goes all the way back to 2003. So when they won, it meant extra for them because none of those guys had ever won at Iowa State. None of them had ever even seen an Iowa team win at Iowa State.
Right.
So Bohannon puts on this little show after the game, and what bugs me about it is I could have very easily picked up those shoes and, okay, they're mine because Iowa State didn't want them. Iowa State just left them alone, told somebody to pick them up and get rid of them, I think.
Mike, you told me when grabbed one of those shoes. That would have been a great story.
But what ended up happening is that the shoes got back to Bohannon, a team manager or somebody brought them back to the dressing room. So he ends up putting them online as part of some fundraising thing for University of Iowa Children's Hospital, and they got several $1,000s out of the deal. So it had a happy ending. But, it would have been a happy ending for me, too, if I would have just picked up those shoes. It would have been very unprofessional, but I could have just picked them up and put them on line myself and been a big benefactor. But it's best that I stayed out of the story.
We appreciate your proximity to this story. That sounds amazing. That's perfect. And anytime we can bring up Monte Morris on the podcast, we're very pleased. His assistant.
Monte Morris, man, that is as good a college point guard as has ever played in the state of Iowa. I loved watching him play.
He was just a magician with the ball and took such good care of it. And anytime we can bring up George Niang, I think that's a fairly accurate comparison. If we're going to, just go back, one part of the conversation to Garza. I mean, the footwork, maybe not the full game that is included there, but he was just so skilled with the ball and so skilled with his footwork that he made it happen on the offensive end and on the defensive end. Lo and behold, he's signed a nice contract with the Jazz.
Yeah, they're different players, but what you said is right on the money in terms of, I hate to use that phrase old school, but it just seems to come right out of you.
No doubt. So I guess let's stick with Bohannon. He shut down the season after the shoe move, and I feel like this might be a little similar to, for Iowa fans out there, for the Jeff Settles situation a bunch of years back where he got that 6th year of eligibility. So I guess the question is, Bohannon healing, will he obtain another year of eligibility? Where does this all stand currently with his status for playing for the Hawkeyes next year?
Well, Fran McCaffrey said last week that he's healthy, doing fine. His body is the best it's been in quite a while. And Bohannon himself has put out a lot of videos this summer of him doing dribbling drills. Again, like I said, the kid's a promoter, but put these dribbling drills online and encouraged kids to copy him. And so kids are sending in their own videos of them copying him. And the thing is, they can certainly use him next season. I mean, he's a 12-point a game or so career scorer and a 3-point threat who opens up everything.
Correct.
And they didn't quite have the 3-point output that they maybe could have used to have had a better record. They had a short rotation. Bohannon shut it down after 10 games. They were going with 8 guys, and they were without one of them, C.J. Frederick, for a handful of those. There weren't a lot of consistent 3-point guys, and you can never have too many of those in 21st century basketball, so Bohannon immediately gives them one. He played in 10 games last season, which is the max you can play before you try to get the medical red shirt.
Right.
But he wasn't really himself. I mean, he was coming off a hip surgery, and he wasn't really the player he had been the first 3 years. If he resembles that next season, they've got something.
Well, you mentioned some of the 3-point accuracy. Bohannon would definitely add to that. And you mentioned CJ with his health problems. He was probably your best option from beyond the arc as far as 3-point shooting. And that just adds to the equation. There's so much returning for the Hawkeyes. They exist inside everybody's like way too early top 25 list for next season. And some places have the Hawkeyes holding a top 10 spot. So I guess the next question is, who's next in line to explode for this Hawkeyes efficient offense with further opportunity? I mean, the pace of play and the tempo that the Hawkeyes operate at is going to be, Luis Cam, Patrick McCafferty, skilled players with length who can guard multiple positions on the floor. So who's the next player you think might explode and take advantage of the offensive opportunities inside an Iowa offense?
Well, I wouldn't say Joe Wieskamp because I think he's already there. He averaged 14 points last season as a sophomore, kind of tailed off in the last 6 games or so, but he's an inside-outside guy who there was a 7-game stretch in midseason against good teams, Big Ten teams, where he averaged 20 points. He dropped 26 on Maryland one game, had 23 in that game I told you about at Palestra. I think he had 30 against Nebraska in a home game where he just had his own way with them. So Wieskamp's already there. Garza obviously is Garza.
Right.
Frederick scored 10 a game as a freshman. As you mentioned, his three-point shooting was clearly the team's best. Ridiculously good for a freshman, 46%. I say the guy who's going to have the best chance of taking off is point guard Joe Toussaint, who will be a sophomore. He's from the Bronx. He is a Jet. He is a good defender. He might be the best defender on the team already. He was raw, as you would expect an 18-year-old, 19-year-old point guard to be in his first college season. But you could see the flashes. You could see that this is going to be something like I don't think that McCaffrey's had at Iowa. In fact, I know he hasn't. A point guard who can just dissect defenses with the ball. In transition, he's really good. He's got, he's unafraid. His mistakes were made out of aggression, not out of being tentative. And that's what you want to see. And so I think that if this guy takes off the way I think he can, and then Iowa's going to, then I think Iowa's a real problem for teams.
Well, if you can add a New York City guard and his toughness and creativity with the ball, and we adore New York City guards here. Being from the tri-state area. So if you can add that to an already efficient offense and just add another dynamic, create another scoring alleyway, create a couple of more opportunities on easy touches when he drives in and can create and then just drop it off to one of the big men that we just mentioned, whether it be Garza or Wieskamp or whoever. I mean, that sounds like it would just be another problem for opposing coaches to solve. Now, we know that this team can score with anybody in the nation, Mike, and we're talking like, Gonzaga, Creighton, BYU type video game numbers on the offensive end, just bananas. The question is always going to be, can they guard enough to advance in March? Can they guard enough to play for a Big Ten title? Or can they guard enough to, for something like a little bit bigger, like that could be on the horizon for next season? Is there enough on the defensive end to balance out the offensive greatness that this team possesses?
Well, that's always going to be the question. The decade of Fran McCaffery's teams here, they've never been what you would call a great defensive team. They've had their moments. Mm-hmm. They held Maryland under 50 points at Carver Hawkeye this season. But the long term, this is an offensive built program, and the focus is on offense. And they can talk about it. But if you look at the numbers, they've been among the conference leaders in points per game on a regular basis, whether they've been good or so-so, whereas if you look at their defensive points allowed per game, they've been one of the poorest, even when they've had good teams. Mm-hmm. So it's an aggressive philosophy, and I don't think that's going to change much. To me, the question is, will the offense improve enough maybe to make the defense seem better, to make up for things? I don't think they've got great defensive players, but they've got more of a hard edge to them than they've had in the past. Part of that comes, I mentioned Toussaint, but a big part of that is Fran McCaffery's son, Connor. Connor is one of these guys who you'll never, well, I shouldn't say never, but he's not going to be a scorer, a big scorer. Although he showed a willingness to take three-pointers when the team needed them. However, what he is, a ball player. He's a distributor. He sees the game better than anybody else on the team, I think, and better than most players in the college game. He's a coach on the floor, which is a cliche, except it's true. He doesn't make mistakes, and we talked about Monte Morris protecting the ball, and Morris annually led the country in assists to turnovers. Connor McCaffrey led the country in that department this past year as a sophomore. And he's was a third year sophomore. I mean, he's just going to be an extremely mature fourth year junior. And he is one of those guys who aren't that common, who truly do, I think, make his teammates better.
I think that's all this team would need. I think it would need that, you mentioned that edge or that toughness. And I think they would just need that for a couple of possessions a game to close out a game, because they're going to score enough. And you mentioned they can win a slow down game like the game you referenced with Maryland.
Yeah.
But because they're going to get their shots up. If they can just clamp down and just get a couple of stops, whether it be Toussaint or McCaffrey, whoever else is going to help out there on the wing, that sounds like a winning formula.
And I want to say, I don't want to just completely dump on their defense, because it's not horrendous. Some games it is, but there have been seasons where it was from pillar to post, they were a bad defensive team. They've got guys on the team, I think, who are better defenders than they've had in the past. C.J. Frederick is a good defender. Connor McCaffrey's good. Toussaint's good. Garza, I thought his defense got too much criticism. I thought what he was asked to do, I thought he did a decent job. But he can't get in foul trouble, especially when they have an 8-man rotation and they want him to play 38 minutes a game. There are going to be times when he's got to back off, and I thought he was very smart about that. So maybe there's more there to it than I'm giving him credit for, but I'm going to have to see it first, because I haven't really seen a lot of it over these 10 years.
Well, I think the Hawkeye fans are going to appreciate your optimistic outlook, not your pessimistic outlook on their defense. I think there's going to be a little applaud in the background of the podcast right now. So this team is led by Coach McCaffrey. He's the mastermind on both sides of the ball. Let's just say he's very passionate. So let's go with 2 questions here, Mike. One is, what's one coaching characteristic that coach owns on the sidelines or the practice floors that allows for his massive offensive output and success? And does coach just get a little lost in the moment, like when he goes bananas on the sidelines? I mean, his staff has to be ready at all times to walk him back a little bit, right, Mike?
Oh, yeah. The first part of your question, I would say that I would define him as a coach as aggressive in that, and he says this often to the point where, sometimes when coaches say things over and over again, I tend to tune it out, but he does say repeatedly, he wants his players to be aggressive. He wants his shooters to shoot. If he's got a good shooter who's missed 5 in a row, he'll say, he tells them, take another. If you got a shot, shoot it. He's more tolerant of errors of aggression than of errors of stalling out and overthinking things. So it's attack. He's from Philadelphia. He grew up playing against great basketball players in that city. As you know, you can start a list right now and we can talk until the middle of next week about great players in Philly. He played at Penn for 3 years. They were very good then. He was a key to that. He wants players to be versatile, and that's been sort of a hallmark of this thing. Guys who can play inside and outside, can play the 1, the 2, and the 3, or the 3, the 4, and the 5. Garza's going to play center because that's what he has to do, but Garza was a forward for 2 years and was sort of the sidekick to Tyler Cook. Bohannon plays point guard, some plays off guard, some. Connor McCaffrey plays the 1, 2, 3, even the 4. It gives them, I think, a lot of flexibility in the course of a long season and in the course of a 40-minute game to adapt to things and change things up. And so in that term, that's how I would describe him when he's got players that he likes, which is now. As far as the personality stuff, he gets lost in the moment. I think if you put a percentage on how much the coaches let things, how they become oblivious to some things, I think some coaches always have a foot on the floor. And it doesn't happen all that much, but sometimes McCaffrey it's like an out-of-body experience, I think, But it's also the way he looks when he's getting mad. He gets the red face and the rage, whereas other coaches, I think, can get just as angry at officiating or their own teams, but they just don't have the face, what's behind the face, that makes them look out of control. But I've sat behind a lot of coaches, and a lot of coaches go a little cuckoo during games. But when Fran goes off, it's a show. It's a great show. He's busted a lot of clipboards in huddles. He's been restrained by assistants a lot of times. And when a game's over with and you ask him about it, he just kind of shrugs his shoulders like it wasn't that big a deal. He's never apologetic. It's just who he is.
And it's yielded great success for the program, but you're right. It is an unbelievable show that college basketball fans know that they can have a percentage chance they might see something a little bananas from him on the sidelines if things go askew officiating-wise especially. And you're right, Mike. The visual along with the audio, it creates this unique experience where you're like, okay, here it comes. Like you have this anticipatory feeling of like, oh, this is where it might go off the rails a little bit. So thank you for telling that story, though. All right, Mike, let's look into the crystal ball a little bit and play fortune teller for next season for the Hawkeyes. Assuming Garza returns, is some of this top 10 hype for real, and is it appropriate? Are we getting ahead of ourselves here? Should we include the Hawkeyes in this like off-season and preseason Final Four chatter that's usually reserved for teams like Duke or Kentucky or Gonzaga or Villanova? Where's the proper level here? Where should we be placing or slotting this Iowa team?
Top 10, I think, I have, like you have seen them in a lot of people's top 10s. I'm gonna need to see it before I buy into it. But, having said that, they weren't that far off from being a top 10 team this year. You switch around a few games. They were in the top 25 almost the whole season, with an 8-man rotation most of the season. But what I need to see is a few things. First of all, they're going to need somebody besides Garza to step up in the post. Now, Jack Nunge, who missed almost the entire season because of knee surgery, is 6'10", 6'11", and they were raving about how he was playing in camp leading up to the start of the season. He's a forward. So if he can come in and help with the bigs, okay, that would be significant. Will Bohannon blend back in and work? Because Bohannon's not going to be the star of the team. Luka Garza assumed that role. Is Bohannon going to be comfortable being, a cog in things? Can he be the player he was as a sophomore and junior? If he is, that's a pretty significant thing again. So there are always ifs with these college basketball teams because nobody's a ready-made champion, it seems like. Very few. I think there's very, very high ceiling for this team, but I've also seen this movie too many times around the country where everybody was just assumed to be loaded and but do the pieces fit? Because I think you see with conference champions, like the Dayton team that you featured recently, the pieces fit so well.
Yep.
It was more than talent. It was cohesiveness. And Iowa's team, I thought, was pretty cohesive this season, all things considered, given the adversity they faced from a health standpoint. This has not been a Big Ten title contender in 10 years under Fran McCaffrey. And in fact, it's a program that hasn't won the Big Ten regular season title since it shared it in 1979.
Wow.
It makes me really hesitant to call them a league title favorite or anything of the sort. At the same time, they've got talent. They've got dedicated players. It's a good roster. It's a lot of guys who've got individual high hopes for the future. So that could be a potent brew.
It seems like, especially with the situation that we're all existing and operating in right now, if we're just going to go sports with it a tiny bit. If you have a coach that has been around and has his system installed and that isn't a first or second year coach, and you have a ton of returning players that know the drill, that can anticipate what's going to happen during the preseason, are going to work hard during the summer, like you mentioned a bunch of the Hawkeyes do, then maybe that's the type of recipe, the type of ingredients that will yield massive results next season, because we just don't know how the preseason and how the season is going to lay out next season. So maybe having some of those known quantities is going to help a team like the Hawkeyes find success early on where other teams might be scuffling.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that veteran teams are going to have more of an advantage than they would have normally if this thing does get started. You're going to want guys who already know what they're doing, and probably going to be less time to incorporate freshmen and for younger players to get better, etc. He has his best, I don't want to say the best, but it might be the best in terms of togetherness, in terms of guys who are focused and guys who really have a hunger for it. And I think his son Connor really adds to that. I think Garza, I don't think there's a major player in college basketball who wants to be great as much as Garza does. I mean, this is a 24/7 thing with him. And Wieskamp is cut from that cloth. So when you've got a few of your leaders who are that way, it filters down to everybody.
We're going to stick in the Big Ten for a second here. The fact that culture, the self-improvement culture, I think that I can improve on this one element or aspect of my game during the off-season culture. That is just kudos to the coaching staff, what they try to employ every day with their student athletes. But let's stick inside the Big Ten, and this is a quick New Jersey-centric question here. We have to ask you, Mike, is Rutgers for real? They were a pain in the neck this year for the first time ever inside the Big Ten, and they were ranked for a few weeks. It's been a long time. I mean, you mentioned the timeline for your program as far as winning a championship, whether it be in conference or otherwise, but this Rutgers team is suffering a similar drought. So from what you saw, do you feel like this Rutgers team is for real and can compete inside the Big Ten again next season?
I think that there'll be a lot of trouble. Every one of 20 times that they play a Big Ten game, that the opponent's going to have to take them seriously. Maybe they played over their skis just a little bit this past season, but I think they have good players, Harper and Baker. Harper has just been an Iowa killer, the games I've seen him play. If he's anything compared to that against everybody else, he's an All-America, but he's good. I like Mathis. Obviously, Pikiell has created something there, a mentality or whatever you want to call it, and they're not intimidated by anybody. And the place where they play is such a snake pit. That means so much in college basketball. Yeah, I mean, really, did they lose any players of major importance? You'd know better than I would, but it seems to me that the heart and soul of the team is coming back. They're not going to sneak up on anybody. I would certainly expect to see them in the top 4 in the Big Ten in everybody's preseason predictions.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they can kind of have some sustained success here. And, the only person they're losing the Stony Brook grad transfer who just played one season, who was a nice 3-point shooter for them. Pikiell, I guess, had influence on coming over at Stony Brook. But besides that, they bring all the important pieces back. So it'd be nice to see them, at least exist and be, I don't know, I'm not a factor, but at least not be a pushover inside the Big Ten. All right, let's get you out of here. Let's get you out of here on 3 fun ones, Mike. Let's go with our final 3 T questions. We'll ask you some tastes, a player you trust, and then tunes. What are you listening to? So taste, is there a craft beer that we need to know about near Iowa City, Iowa?
A place called Big Grove Brewery. It's a huge building in Iowa City, and it's become very popular in a short period of time.
Excellent. So if you're out there, keep your eyes peeled for that. Okay, Mike, trust. Who is one player in the nation, any place in the nation, doesn't have to be inside the Big Ten, from this past season that you would trust with a last-second possession with the game on the line to make a game-winning shot or a game-winning decision?
Well, I say this because I watch a lot of Pac-12 basketball because of Bill Walton. I'd say Peyton Pritchard of Oregon. Most times I watched him, I thought, that guy's, I'm not sure what it is about him, except that he just finds a way.
He made more big shots this season than seemingly anybody in college hoops. I mean, you can throw a Geo Baker in that mix or maybe a Crutcher from Dayton. But, I mean, it seemed like if their game was on the line and Pritchard had a shot at it, he was going to make that and force it into overtime or win that thing. He was amazing this past season. And tunes, Mike, what have you been listening to while you're longing for the return of sports?
Well, I've been listening to Howard Stern when I go for walks. But,
there you go.
But for tunes, I've kind of done a deep dive into John Prine since he died a few weeks ago.
Sure.
Just goes without saying how terribly sad it is, but it's sort of gotten me to check out his deep catalog of great songs. I watched a video of him singing Angel from Montgomery with Bonnie Raitt not that long ago. And, of course, he wrote the song. She popularized it, and they do it together, and it is just goosebumpy. So that's what I would say.
Nice. He's one of the most underrated songwriters in American music history. I totally agree with you on Prime. The fantastic call. Mike, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for jumping on and talking some college hoops for the listeners out there. We really appreciate it. Thanks for catching up with everything inside the Big Ten and the Hawkeyes. So please stay safe, calm, and strong out there. Cheers, cilantro, da salazia, Mike. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thanks to you.